Well, thank you, Steve. I think we've had two presentations that are actually very complementary. They've taken different approaches, they've raised different issues. So we now have half an hour to throw things open to the floor. Can I ask you, we're going to take questions in groups. We may also get people contributing over the internet, I'm told. Liam will raise his hand to represent anyone coming in over the internet. If I could ask you to identify yourself as you speak. I think, is there a microphone going to go around? Yeah, wait for the microphone and then identify yourself. And as I said, we'll take questions in groups of 3 or 4 and put them to Ousman and Steve. Okay. Who would like to raise a question? This gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Mark Napier. I'm working with Gatsby on agricultural issues at the moment. I'm a consultant. Just a question really around the poor performance of Southern Africa on these agricultural trends. I assume Zimbabwe, climate and HIV/AIDS is to blame, but I welcome your views.
Thank you. This lady over here.
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me okay? I'm Miriam Neal, I'm the Ethical Trade Manager for Food in Tesco. So you can probably guess my question. Could you say a bit more about what your vision is for institutional innovations in supply chains? Thanks.
Thank you. This gentleman here.
Thanks. Tony Simons, Deputy Director General from the International Centre for Research in Agroforestry. To both speakers, how much will certification for export crops be a barrier as much as an opportunity? And is it as much about consumer compliance or as a driver of positive change for African agriculture?
Let's take one question over there and then we'll...
Alex Georgiano.
If you could just wait. Yeah.
Alex Georgiano most recently was SOAS. It's really just an add-on to the institutional question, and it really has to do with the impact of institutions in helping to access finance to agricultural development. Warehousing, logistics, transportation is used to build lendable collateral.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's put those questions to our speakers. I've noted some more questions and we'll pick those up in a moment.
You want to start? The question of Southern Africa was raised. It's a good question. My working hypothesis would be the difficulties of seeing a way forward in Southern African agriculture are, for me, framed in the failure of the urban and the industrial economy, isn't it? If you look at the case of Zimbabwe, yes, we know there's a million other factors going on, but the most tragic thing you see in many villages is the collapse of the links to Harare. There was a time that you put your kids through secondary school and you had a pretty good chance they would get a half-decent job in Harare, and then there'd be remittances coming back home. And now you see farmers with those kids, 18-year-olds wearing nice box trainers, been all through secondary school, bright kids, and you just say, where are the jobs for them? So I do look at that, the disappointments of urbanization, successful industrialization, successful urban service economies, and I see in that the disappointments first of all. That's top of my list. There are all the other factors that you've mentioned, of course, but I do see that very strongly.
Okay. Let me address a couple of questions. The one on certification and institutions for access to financial services. Certification a barrier or a driver of positive change? It certainly may appear like a barrier at the beginning, and it does actually constitute a barrier, but it's not unsurmountable. Countries can deal with it, and there are examples. The one that I'm the most familiar with is the example of Senegal, which between 1997 and I think 2004 has quadrupled export to the to the EU, I'm sorry, of non-traditional commodities. And they did that in a very clever way, systematically addressing each and every one of those bottlenecks. Quality management was a very big issue. And these were smallholders, by the way, though, of course, large-scale exporters as well. But a lot of them were smallholders. But they targeted quality management, bringing certification services into the country, going into market intelligence, transport, all those different things. And I think by conventional standards, it was a very low-cost project, $8 million from the World Bank over 4 years, which has a huge, huge, huge impact. But there's something that is certainly something that one can learn from that project. Certification is a driver of positive change in a sense that not just consumers here, but also consumers down in those countries need safer products. So in that sense, it has a quite nice collateral impact on that. What is the lesson from there is that if one targets the specific bottlenecks, they can be overcome. But the cost of doing it can be very expensive, in particular certification services providers. Until recently, last time I looked, a couple of countries, maybe Morocco and South Africa, did have accredited companies in country to provide these certification services. You have to get somebody from Europe or from somewhere else to do that. I think African countries will have to invest in the infrastructure and the labs and the skills for certification services provision, and then do what they need to do for the accreditation of those services. But I think there's no way around certification, and at the end of the day, it's really good for African consumers as well, because it raises the safety of the foods that they consume. So it can be overcome as an obstacle, and it has a positive byproduct for African consumers. Institutions for access to finance. There are several things that are happening. I was stunned when I saw, again, I came from Senegal about a week ago, seeing one commercial bank advertising credit and offering consumer credit for 7.5%. 5 years ago, they wouldn't look at you walking into those banks. Okay? But competition is growing. They're looking for new customers. There are even banks that are offering actually no fees for a current account. So it's a totally different landscape. It hasn't reached, however, the rural areas. And it's very complicated to reach smallholders in their millions. What I have seen farmers' organization proposing as part of the agribusiness and market access framework of CAREB is that the only way you really can solve that problem is to find a way of turning smallholders into credible business partners to banks, to input providers, to processors and traders and others. And what they think might do it is to try and reach small farmers through their farmers' organizations, upgrading their commercials and technical skills. Okay, give them an accountant to be able to do the books. Give them a technical, an engineer to be able to advise and things like that, so that they can provide the services to their membership and turn them into more credible partners to the banks. It is really on both sides that they have the problem. I think the banks are feeling the pressure now to find more and more customers in many countries, but they need to have a better client in front of them. And it's not going to be the individual smallholder as such, but it has to be an intermediary. And I think that the farmers' organizations and cooperatives are the best place to get started to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, let's have our next round, and we'll take Denny over there, this gentleman here, and Felicity, and I'll take you in the next round.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm Benny Dembitzer. I'm a Marxist. I don't belong to any organization that will have me. Groucho Marxist, I meant to say. Couple of points. Ousman, when you mentioned about the bloke sending money back to his family in Africa, my experience with diaspora organizations, for example, from Ghana or Ethiopia, is that they're actually very wary of sending money back for agriculture because of lack of certainty over land ownership. Neither of you have mentioned that. And it seems to me that the various arguments that both speakers have mentioned are in favor of the medium and large scale producer or farmer who has the muscle. Second point I wanted to make is that neither of you has mentioned how important it is for local farmers and local governments to do a two fingers to international organizations. I've been doing a lot of work recently in Malawi, and the great success of Malawian small-scale agriculture has been that they've told the World Bank where to get off in terms of subsidies to fertilizers. Okay. And the third point is, to me, that one of the radical changes in the last few years has been the increasing purchasing of bodies like the World Food Programme from local farmers and not donating more American surplus aid. Again, something that you have not alluded to. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Tom Levitt. I'm a consultant on third sector issues, but in a previous life I was parliamentary aide to Hilary Benn when he was at DFID. My question is to Steve, and it's about the opportunities. Where does food processing come on your list of opportunities in terms of keeping the value of the product in Africa, and how can multinational food companies be encouraged to go along with that agenda?
I think Felicity was next.
Yeah, thank you. Felicity Proctor, independent consultant. A question really to Stephen and to Ousman. Ousman, you mentioned quite interesting high levels of investment that were required for funding to get agricultural growth and development up to a level that was perceived to be required. I'd like to know a little bit more about how those figures have derived and what they contain. But I'd also like to ask that question to Steve, when you've answered it, to see whether the things that Steve would like to see funded are actually included in the type of investment you're talking about. Because I somehow feel that we may be going along different tracks, and I say that in the context of this new global agricultural food security programme that's come out of the G8, G20, which is multi-millions going into agriculture and food, which, if you look at the very short text on the World Bank website, is very traditional, improving varieties, improving inputs, type agriculture. And I see a lot of very different things coming out here, and how we're going to fill that sort of gap.
Yeah, thanks. Right, let's take those three questions.
Okay. Should I go first this time around? Okay, thank you. The remittances and land ownership. As far as I know, most people sending money back home are doing it to meet consumption and other social needs. It's not for investments. It's not because there's anything going wrong in agriculture which is preventing them from doing it, but there are more immediate needs that they have to attend to, helping people make ends meet and things like that. They may invest for themselves in agriculture, but often what they send to others is to help them make ends meet. So it's not really investment remittances, but safety net remittances. Maybe that's why. I don't think it has anything to do with land, really. Land may have its own problem, but I don't think it has something to do with it. I'm surprised that you felt we're in favor of medium, large-scale farmers. I don't think I am, and I don't think Steve is. Maybe it's the way we came across, but that's not what we are favoring here. Malawi versus the World Bank. There's something I heard through the arguments which has always been for me a concern. The issue is not whether we're standing up to the World Bank or to the IMF or to DFID or to anybody. The fact that they're from outside does not necessarily mean that they're wrong. The fact that we're from within doesn't mean that we're necessarily right. So therefore, I think we should look at the arguments based on their own intrinsic values, not where it comes from. What Malawi is doing, I was just talking to Steve about it. When I did my bachelor's thesis, I wrote it on a similar program in Senegal. I have born and raised in what we call the Groundnut Basin, which is really the agricultural basket of Senegal. We're getting so much money coming into that region every year, which was a third of what we should have gotten, but still was quite a bit of money. But what Senegal did would dwarf what Malawi is doing today. And what Senegal achieved doing that in the initial years would also dwarf what Malawi did. Senegal had a program that gave to farmers pesticides, fungicides, seeds, fertilizers, bagging materials, machinery, animals for traction, storage space, trucks for moving the goods, everything, from 1960s to 1979. And there were about 5 or 6 agencies doing it. It was called the Agricultural Program. Everybody knows what it was. By 1979, we achieved phenomenal growth in agriculture and modernization of agriculture. Until today, when you go to Senegal, after the farmers have left the field, you look at the farm, you think they're using tractors because of the technology, all in lines, very clean. They set up manufacturing plants to produce the equipment that the farmers were using. Okay, all the things were real good achievements, but the cost was too high. By 1979, one of those agencies had a deficit which was equal 98% of the central government budget. One. And Senegal was one of the very few countries that couldn't wait for the World Bank to come. The president went to Washington saying, I cannot pay my civil service in a month or two. That's how structural adjustment came to Senegal. We did have a lot of impact on that. And incidentally, last year, the country was celebrating 1 million tons of groundnuts, which we used to produce in the 60s. 50 years later, they were happy to be where they were 50 years earlier, despite all those investment, all the money. So what is important is that question shouldn't be about subsidized or not subsidized, but what are you doing in the best way that has the best interest of the country? It's easy to demonstrate that if you get fertilizers and seeds and those things in the farmers, you get bumper crops. It's easy. But what is difficult is that do you have the systems in place? He was talking about institutions that allows farmers to have access day in, day out at reasonable cost to those inputs. And the safest way to do it may be some types of subsidies, not all types of subsidies. But you have to get back to the systems. You have to get back to the institutions, not just to use the price and the budgetary power. And I think that is the issue, the mistake that Malawi may be making. It will demonstrate a lot of progress. But I bet in 10, 15 years from now, and you look at the numbers, the budget deficit is increasing in terms of the share of GDP. It's going towards 3% right now. So I think that is going to be an issue. And Malawi should not look at the World Bank, but should look at itself and its interests in the long run. By the way, I don't think the bank is against subsidy. I worked for the World Bank for 10 years. The last program I did for Rwanda, there was 40% subsidy for anybody investing in technology, in science, in processing, whatever it is. And it did get approved by the World Bank board. Okay, so I think that you can defend subsidies if you really want it, but it has to be really sound subsidies for the country. I don't think Malawi is going in the right direction. Food processing and multinationals, I'll leave that to you, but I have a very nice story I would like to tell here. When I was growing up in the middle of Senegal, we had relatives going to Dakar and coming back. I went to Dakar first at the age of 19, 20, so I'm a real country boy. But then we were shocked when they came back, they said they couldn't eat millet couscous. I said, oh yeah, why they're bragging, they've been to Dakar, and now the superstars, they can't eat that. But what happened is that they just couldn't find it in Dakar, and when they came back, they just couldn't tolerate it. And the reason why they couldn't find it in Dakar is that it has to be made in the houses. Okay, somebody in the household who need to understand how to make millet couscous has to make it. And younger girls and older women in the cities didn't know how to do it. So, but on the countryside, people are doing, you grow up with it. When you go to Dakar, you can't anymore. Now, today, I'm eating millet couscous in Washington, D.C. because there's a processing going on, and there are several companies doing it. Okay, whenever I go to Senegal, I take a suitcase with me. All right, and when I go back, it's different millet products processed that you can buy it also in DC today. So processing is the way to go. It just doesn't add value; it expands demand for what farmers are doing. Senegal is now importing millet from Mali to add to the local supply, which is quite Quite good. And I'll get back to the funding requirements. Perhaps I should give to Steve first an opportunity to answer to those, and I'll come back to the funding estimations.
Okay, I just second what Ousman has said about processing. Of course, processing presumably in the broadest sense of processing, not just putting things in factories and perhaps ending up with different products, canning and the like, but all of that business of preparing and adding value into something that customers will pay for. The bit I've never quite understood about food processing, and I think people have tried to explain to me, but it never makes sense to me. In the world of manufacturing consumer goods, no one's ever going to produce this kind of thing here anymore, are they? You'd design this kind of machine here and you'd get it made somewhere in East Asia. And I've never quite understood why chocolate bars are not made in Ghana, because you'd think by the same logic, you'd design the chocolate bar here in the UK.
No dairy industry, no sugar industry, no peanut industry.
Okay.
But chocolate is not just cocoa.
Are you from Switzerland?
Yeah, but you know.
New Zealand.
New Zealand, okay.
Yeah, well that's fine. A lot of Kiwi products get a long way around the world, so why don't we just import them?
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, it's where is your labour cheap that defines presumably why this is made in Asia and it's not made, you know, down the road here. So yeah, I just leave that as something I haven't fully understood. See, Mars bars are made in Slough, aren't they? And there must be an awful lot of imports in that, and yeah. Okay, I'm ignorant on that. Felicity asked a really good question about financing, and you're opening up here, Felicity, one of the desperately inconvenient debates that we have on African agriculture, because everybody's lined up quite rightly behind the Maputo pledge that says, what is it, 10% of the budget goes to agriculture, which would be great. But I would say out of every 100 units of resource we're putting into agriculture, not many of those units of resource are going to go into the Ministry of Agriculture, yeah? Roads, and I noticed that Ousman emphasised health and education, the importance of these in rural areas, and I would concur with that. Clean water as well. And when you finish paying for those, which are quite expensive items, you're left with a Ministry of Agriculture budget, most of which will probably go then on to research and extension, which is good news, because we're still convinced that every time we do a study which has returns to research, it's usually a very, very high rate of internal rate of return, which suggests an underinvestment still in research. Now, when you've made those things, of course, you then say, well, what's he left out of the picture here? And the answer is, of course, anything that looks like a private good or a subsidy. And if you want to spend 10% of the budget very quickly on agriculture, then upscaling a subsidy or introducing a subsidy makes the numbers look like you're really supporting the farmers, but there's a big question about the opportunity cost. I think a lot of the resources would go through other ministries. Now, some people would find that a very uncomfortable thought, because they somehow feel that agriculture is purely the Ministry of Agriculture, but it can't be.
I just come to that, yeah. Actually, if you look at the numbers, Steve, those countries that have met the 10% gone beyond, those are Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, and I don't know which other countries. And you look at them, most of them, it's a huge chunk of subsidy to the cotton parastatal. It is not going into productive investments. But the others are making good progress. But those who have always been above the 10%, were doing it because of subsidies. Others have gone maybe from 4 to 6 or 7%. So there is an improvement in there, and there should be room for increasing investment in agriculture in a broader sense. But how did we get to the funding requirement estimates? We did two things. First, for every country, we looked at the historical relationship between public expenditure, and growth. Estimated the relationship. For Africa in general, it's about 0.366 or 0.37. Every 1% increase in public expenditure in agriculture has raised the growth rate by 0.37%. In countries, it's different. Some are below. We have hardly seen a country above. Most countries are that we have done so far. The average includes the South Africas and others. So around 0.24, some 0.27, many of them. So we first look at that relationship, the gross elasticity of expenditure, and then we look at the impact of raising growth on poverty reduction. Again, the poverty elasticity of growth, how much a 1% increase in gross would translate into a reduction in poverty. So that's how we did that. And for a given country, it depends on the composition of growth. If you're talking about the 6%, how the 6% come about? Is it primarily livestock, primarily cereals, primarily commercial agriculture? We look at all those different things and we put them together. And because of the different shares in employment and incomes, it has a different impact on the composition of this growth has a different impact on poverty. So it's quite a detailed and tedious work that we do. And we have done it for about 24 countries for now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've got time for one more quick round. I promise these two on the front here, the gentleman there and the gentleman on the right there. I think we'll have to probably call it a day.
Yeah, thanks. David Howell from Africa College, University of Leeds. It's to many to Ousman, but great. I saw that the graph where you say there's a take-off due to structural adjustment. Do you think in 15 years' time we can come back and say CADAT took place 15 years ago and then we had a take-off? How confident are you that CADAT will sort of deliver change, and what change do you think that is in Africa? Maybe also to Steve.
Yeah. Well, okay, it's going to be more.
Sure. We're running out of time rapidly.
Thank you.
Very quick questions and then quick answers, please.
My name's Eliza. I am a writer for The Guardian, but I also am a project officer for an environmental NGO called Pan UK. And my question is really about that quick statement that was made about something being, agriculture being ecologically benign. And for the sort of organization I work for, that's a question we have not so much with food crops, but with cash crops. I work with cotton farmers. And so my question is, the Green Revolution often implies, agrochemical inputs, and those have had huge environmental and social consequences on smallholder farmers. So how much are you looking to promote organic or integrated pest management? How much support do you offer to local government and farmers who are interested in alternative solutions where the agrochemical lobby is so strong? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This gentleman over here.
Stephen Sanford. I don't think either of our speakers until the very last response just now have mentioned livestock. Livestock, I think, account for about 25% of GDP. The income elasticity of demand for livestock products on the whole is very attractive. What's the problem that you don't mention it?
Thank you.
What was the next part of the question? What's the problem?
Why haven't we mentioned it?
Oh, why haven't we mentioned it? Okay.
Hello, Abdi Ghavami, Senior Lecturer in Food and Nutrition at London Metropolitan University. My first question is to do with the increased food production which Steve put in his presentation, whether that has translated into reducing malnutrition or undernutrition in the north and western side of Africa.
Yep.
And would you please also expand on what you mean by fertilizer liberalisation? How does that work? Since when I was in Mozambique towards the end of last year, many of the poor farmers had the buying of chemical fertilizers were challenging to them because of the cost. So they went on to try to find natural fertilizers from extracts of onion or garlic, for example, to help them in that case for their crops. I was wondering what you meant by fertilizer liberalisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen.
Okay, thank you. I wish the answer would be that in 15 years when we look back, we really would see a difference that CADEP has made. But it's a matter of how it's going to be implemented, whether the mindset and the directions that are emerging from it are sustained, whether the global community aligns and continues to align with it. There are a lot of ifs. It's full of hopes, I think. it's hard to imagine it disappearing in each and every country. Some countries may probably step back, but I think countries that will stick to it, I think they will have certainly a much better set of opportunities in the future. It is important right now to have something like CADEP. I just got a call from a journalist last week who wanted to talk to me about a new law that's been approved in the Kenyan Assembly to restore price controls again of everything that the farmers are producing. That's where Kenya was about 25 years ago. Now, the danger that we have, and that's why I think CADEP is really important, is that the generation of leaders who went through those pains and those reforms are not active anymore. The new generation of leaders don't know what was wrong about these policies. They were not adopted because they were bad. They were adopted because on the surface they looked good. The policies didn't want to wreck the economies when they adopted those policies. So the same leaders today can make the same mistakes that the leaders did 25 years ago. So I think what CADEP would do probably is to broaden the discussion, to bring in those who would lose from this kind of policies, like the farmers, so that they can talk about it again. It is just for me unimaginable that a farmer who stands up every day, spends 6, 7, or 8 days on his or her farm, produces her good, and somebody claims that it's a common good. You know, it is our rice, it's our maize, it's our this, and we don't export it, we don't do this. It's amazing, right? Nobody goes to the farm with them. But once they have the product, everybody claims it as their property. Okay? And I think that has to change. It's a private product. It belongs to the farmers, and they should be able to sell it at the price that the market offers. So if Kenya continues with this, we'll be back again in 15, 20 years, exactly talking about the same things in Kenya that we did about 15 years ago when it was in the middle of a crisis. It just doesn't work. So if those reversals are prevented by CADEP, that alone I think is going to make a big difference in the future.
Quickly.
You asked the really big question here about the environmental future. The good news and the bad news. I mean, the bad news is the act has to be cleaned up. We were recently just reviewing, the Ghanaian experience, which has been a very successful experience over the last 20 years. But when you look at the environmental accounts for Ghana, they don't look good. There is a huge agenda of cleaning it up. Now, climate change, paradoxically, is the big menace, which I hope will force us in agriculture to do what all farmers have always wanted to do and should have done. We don't want to waste irrigation water. We don't want to waste fertilizer. We don't really want to use filthy systems with vast amounts of toxic chemicals. But the economics has looked that way for quite a while. But the economics of a world drive towards low emissions agriculture would, just for the emissions side, cause us to start putting in serious policies to encourage and support farmers to make those changes. Now, this is an enormous transition, and it has to take place sometime in the next 20 years. But climate change, paradoxically, will give us the push to do those things and to take many of the agroecological approaches, which at the moment are not mainstreamed, into the mainstream. So I'm an optimist that out of one of the toughest challenges, there can be good stuff going on. Very quickly, malnutrition. You saw Burkina Faso on there. Malnutrition of children in Burkina Faso, unchanged in the last 10 years. Horribly bad. Senegal, worst performance on agriculture, sorry Ousman, worst performance in agriculture in West Africa over the last 15 years. Senegalese malnutrition figures going down, down, down. Senegal has got special programs in for malnutrition. They're very successful. Sort of thing that we need more of in Africa. The Burkinabe need to go to Dakar to talk about how you get your agriculture going in semi-arid areas, and the Senegalese need to go to Ouaga and talk seriously about what is happening to the nutrition of children, because Senegal can do it and Burkina can't.
Livestock.
And livestock. I
mentioned it, you didn't, so.
Sorry. I don't know why livestock didn't make it onto the slides here. I'm going to have to ask myself about that. And there is this very serious element in the climate change this thing, how many livestock products can we have in a fair, just world in the future that each person can consume? Because our emissions from particularly ruminant livestock are seriously high. Now that's not the fault of Africa at the moment. It's the fault of people here with our 80, 90 kgs of meat and dairy and so on every year. It's going to come into us on that way.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to call a close to our deliberations. I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative just to say one word about Malawi, which is to say I'm a little bit more positive about Malawi than Ousman is, but I do agree with your central points that macroeconomic stability is absolutely critical. Systems establishment is absolutely critical. Balanced investment, the point that Steve made, is absolutely critical. And you can't make generalizations. But I am more positive than Ousman, and I do see lots of differences between Malawi and Senegal in what they did. I want to close now by thanking our presenters for their excellent presentations, which I think stimulated some really interesting questions. I'm sorry that not all of you managed to get your questions aired, but thank you all of you for a very stimulating discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry, this time next week, technology.
Sorry, Steve. Thank you.